I made a video comparing cyclocross and gravel grinder bikes. I wanted to follow that up with this video, which is going to be more of a discussion video as opposed to going into the technical differences between the two bikes. And the reason I wanted to do this is because there's somewhat of a controversy out there on whether or not there's enough of a difference between a gravel bike and a cyclocross bike to warrant two different categories. A lot of people think it's marketing hype, which some of it may be. I do agree with that. I mean, if you're a bike company, you want to find ways to make money. I get that. But I want to share my thoughts on the difference between the two. And, you know, this controversy to me is kind of like in the mountain bike world, the controversy between wheel sizes. And so I wanted to kind of go into kind of a discussion. Now, it's interesting to me that some companies like Pivot only make one bike that they call a cyclocross / gravel bike, and that's kind of making a statement of saying that there really is not much of a difference to have a different category. Then you've got companies like Niner who make a cyclocross bike, their BSB 9 RDO, and a gravel bike, which is the RLT. So that's a company who, you know, says there is enough of a difference to have two different kinds of bikes. So what do I mean by gravel bike? You know, there's different terms for gravel bikes. You know, some people call them B-road bikes, some people call them adventure bikes or all-purpose bikes or all-road. All those kind of, to me, are synonymous with gravel. So in this video, I'll use the term gravel bike when I'm talking about them. So this video will be from my perspective. Obviously, if you do different kinds of riding or ride in different areas, your views may be a little bit different, but I think I'll speak for most people as a whole when I share my thoughts on these two types of bikes. I'm not going to go much into the technical differences. Obviously, I did that in my first video, so I may repeat some things I said in that first video, but for the most part, this video will have different type of information. But I do want to at least mention the difference between a cyclocross and a gravel bike technically before we go into the discussion. A gravel bike is one that has basically a lower bottom bracket, slacker angles, in other words slacker head and seat tube angle, typically a taller head tube which makes the handlebars a little bit higher, and a longer wheelbase. The idea of all that is that you have a bike that's more comfortable on longer rides. It's also a more stable bike, especially for descents or rougher roads. A cross bike, on the other hand, is going to be more agile with the steeper angles, shorter wheelbase, and that's because in cyclocross races, the corners are really tight and you're doing a lot of braking and accelerating. So I want to jump into the big topic for this discussion, and that is there enough of a difference between the two bikes to own both a cyclocross and a gravel bike? My answer to that question is, for most riders, no. I don't think there's enough of a difference for most riders to own both bikes unless you're really into cyclocross racing and you're really into gravel riding. And that's me. That's why I do own two bikes. But I think for most riders, you're going to be able to pick one or the other and be just fine. I don't think the differences between the two bikes is that significant as it is for mountain biking and comparing a cross-country bike versus an all-mountain or a trail bike. When I go from my cross-country mountain bike to my trail bike, there's a big difference. I mean, I jump on the trail bike and it just, you know, I'm not going to really go into the differences, but I'll just say I can really notice a difference. When I go from my cyclocross to my gravel bike, I do notice a difference, but it's not near as drastic as a cross-country and trail bike. So I will define, what does it mean to really be into gravel riding? Well, that's if you're doing longer rides, so your gravel rides are over, I'm going to say 50 miles. You race gravel events. You do just a lot of training on a gravel bike, and I'll talk about kind of my experience, but that's what I do mainly on my gravel bike. If you're into bike packing, which is packing up your gear and doing multi-day rides, getting all your camping gear, having a bike that's able to carry heavy loads and still be stable and fun to ride. Like I said, I do have both, and so I want to talk about my experience, why I own both a gravel and a cyclocross bike. I decided to get a gravel bike when I made the decision to get out of road riding. I won't really go into much of the reasons, but I've decided to sell my road bike and mainly just train on gravel roads as much as I can. Now, I do have to ride on roads to get to gravel segments, but I spend a lot more a percentage of my riding time on gravel roads now, as opposed to when I used to road ride. And obviously I still mountain bike a lot, but I don't do a lot of gravel events right now. I wish I could, but with my kids and all the family responsibilities, the travel to go to gravel events right now just doesn't really fit into my lifestyle, because in the fall I do a lot of cyclocross racing and I'm traveling a lot. I just don't want to be traveling all year long with doing gravel events. Like I said, I do a lot of my training on my gravel bike or my cyclocross bike, but all of my training is on gravel roads, even though I love mountain biking and I try to mountain bike as much as I can. It's still so easy to just jump on the cross bike or the gravel bike and go hit some dirt roads, because I have some really good routes from my house, a lot of gravel routes that I can do practically right out my back door. And I'm not having to drive to the trailhead. So probably the main reason I have both a gravel and a cyclocross bike is because I have them set up differently. It's not really the fact that they ride so differently, it's because of the setup. So my cross bike is set up pretty racy, in the sense that I only have one front chainring. It's a 42 front chainring, and by the way, a 28 in the back. I've got 140 millimeter rotors, and during the cross season I have it set up with 32C tires, one bottle cage, no mirror, no seat pack or anything like that, and then all that, by the way, weighs about 18 pounds, maybe a little under 18 pounds if I take off the mirror and all that. Now my gravel bike I have set up with 40C tires, 2 water bottle cages, sometimes 3 I might put on it because it has the capacity for a 3rd water bottle cage. I have it set up with my my seat pack on it all the time, my pump, my mirror, and I may even keep fenders on it in the rainy season that we have here in the summertime. And so I also have a power meter on that bike, so I said I use that for training. I don't really like racing with a power meter, so I don't put a power meter on my cyclocross bike, but for training I keep the power meter on the gravel bike, and that bike comes in about 23 pounds, so it's about 5 pounds heavier. Some of that's in the frame. Okay, it's a steel frame, and I'll talk about frame material a little bit later on in this video, but it's a steel frame, and so some of that extra weight's in the frame, some of it's probably in the wheels and tires, and so that's my gravel bike that I have set up. So during the cross season, the cyclocross race season, which goes for about 5 months from September to January, I don't want to have to convert my cyclocross bike back into a gravel bike or a longer distance bike by putting on another water bottle cage, because I only like to race with one water bottle cage. It's very hard to shoulder the bike with 2 water bottle cages. Putting back on the mirror and the seat pack and all that, and I race with 32C tires, so if I only had one bike I would have an extra wheel set, so during the cross season I could put on more gravel tires. I don't like to wear down my race knobbies on a gravel ride, and I like bigger tires for riding gravel roads. The roads that we have around here, there's a lot of it's lime rock, which can get pitted. It can have washboards, so it's very bumpy. 32C tires, that's a little bit too thin for me for long distance on gravel roads. And so, I don't want to have to do that conversion during the cyclocross season, because I'd have to do it on Friday when I'm getting ready for the race, and then on Monday when I want to do my training on gravel roads, I would have to do the conversion again. So doing that back and forth during the cyclocross season, it just would add some extra time to my week. Not saying I couldn't do that. I mean, it's just changing all that stuff may take 10 minutes, but then you gotta make sure you wear the cassette with the chain if you have two different cassettes, and by the time I invest into another wheel set, tires, rotor, cassette for the bike, for the extra wheel set, you're looking at maybe a third or a half the price of a moderately priced gravel bike. So again, that's why I made the decision to have two bikes. It's mainly the differences in the way I have the bikes set up. So that kind of leads to my conclusion that if I didn't have to have two different bike setups during the 5 months of the cyclocross race season, I wouldn't have both. And that's why I said for most riders, I don't think the differences warrant having both bikes. Now it's nice, there's the N+1 theory, where the proper number of bikes is N+1, where N is the current number of bikes you own. It's always great having another bike, especially something like my gravel bike behind me, which is the Niner RL T9 Steel. It's just a sweet bike. And again, I'll talk about the frame material in a minute, and why I really like steel. Now, having said that, I do notice a difference in the ride characteristics. So I'll talk about that for a few minutes, and maybe this will help you decide which one you're going to go with, because I do feel like, like I said, not needing to own two bikes, a lot of riders are going to have to make the choice that are getting into gravel road riding or cyclocross. Do I get a gravel bike with the slacker geometries, or do I get a cyclocross bike? So I want to talk about the differences a little bit and help you make that decision. I do feel like after a really long ride, and I do long rides on both my cross bike and my gravel bike, I do feel a little fresher on the gravel bike most of the time. My neck and my shoulders get a little sore on the cyclocross bike on longer rides, and I say long, 3, 4, 5 hours. I generally now, if the ride is over 2 hours, I'll ride my gravel bike, and I'll talk about why I would pick the cyclocross bike for some rides. And so I also feel a little bit more confident on the gravel bike on rougher, faster terrain. And even though I haven't taken the gravel bike yet up to the mountains and done a really fast descent on the gravel bike, I just know by riding that bike and the way the bike feels that it's going to be more confident and more enjoyable on faster descents. The gravel bike also feels more planted, especially over washboards, and over washboarded sections, which I hate riding washboards, but because the wheelbase is shorter on the cyclocross bike, I feel like it gets bucked around a little bit more, whereas the gravel bike with a longer wheelbase, it doesn't get rocked as much by rough terrain and especially washboards. It just feels more planted and more stable. The gravel bike has the feeling that you're more inside the bike and you're along for the ride, whereas the cyclocross bike, you feel like you're a little bit more on top of the bike, and you have a little bit more maneuverability over the bike, so you can control the bike and move the bike around a little bit more because of that feeling on the cyclocross bike. Now, to pigeonhole a cyclocross bike into it only being good for racing is a huge injustice, because cyclocross bikes make great gravel bikes. It's what I used for years and never had any qualms about doing the gravel rides. Now, once I did ride a gravel bike, I like the feeling of a gravel bike, but there are still times when I choose the cyclocross bike. In fact, I had a friend who was in the market for a cyclocross bike, we went out on a ride together and switched back and forth between my cyclocross bike and my gravel bike, and he ended up going with a cyclocross bike for his gravel road riding. He just liked the way the bike felt. So cyclocross bikes are a great choice for gravel roads. And there are, like I said, there's a lot of times when I choose the cyclocross bike. One of those is when I do fast group rides. And when I say group rides, I mean on gravel, not road. I don't really do many road group rides anymore. But if I'm going out with fast guys on gravel roads, I like my cyclocross bike. I took my my gravel bike out on a night ride a few weeks ago, and man, I had to work like crazy to cover attacks and bridge up and all that, and I just didn't feel like I was riding as strong on the gravel bike as I would on my cyclocross bike. So fast group rides. When I do just want to go out and just have a bike that's really just peppy and accelerates well, and if I just feeling that, like, where you just want to jump up hills and just ride more aggressively, the cyclocross bike is the way to go. If I ride single track, which I do on my cyclocross bike, I actually prefer the cross bike over the gravel bike because the wheelbase is shorter, the bottom bracket's higher, it's a more agile bike, it's lighter, and I can just ride it more aggressively on single track. Now obviously I don't do really rough single track on the cyclocross bike, but smoother single track. And when it gets a little rooty, you really have to pick your lines. It's good practice. I use it for cyclocross racing. I think it's really good bike handling practice to take the bike out on single track. But again, if I'm doing a ride that has some single track, I much prefer the cyclocross bike. And if someone takes my Strava KOM on a dirt road, I'm busting out the cross bike and going to try to get it back. So it's a faster bike. In fact, a lot of the top finishers on some of the main gravel events, and the one that really comes to my mind is the Dirty Kansas 200, probably the premier gravel event in America. A lot of the top finishers are on cyclocross bikes, not really pure gravel bikes. Now, that gravel bikes are really kind of just coming on the scene and having that separate category, so maybe it's the fact that that's what those people started out on. But I still think cross bikes are going to be faster in a lot of situations. Now obviously if you're racing cyclocross competitively, now I say competitively because you can race cyclocross on a gravel bike easily. I don't think it's going to be as fast, so if you're really wanting to be competitive, really wanting to do the best you possibly can, the cyclocross bike is going to be your choice. And if you do that, you're still going to have a great gravel bike. And I'll go into a little bit of what to look for in a cyclocross bike if you want to have both a bike for racing cyclocross and one for longer dirt roads. And in fact, let me go ahead and talk about that. So if you're buying a cyclocross bike and you feel like a cyclocross bike is the better choice over a gravel bike for your riding style and your needs, and you want to have a bike for gravel road riding, I would look for a few things when you're buying the bike. One is the capacity for 40C tires. 40C is my favorite width now for gravel rides. I just think it's a very stable tire. It's pretty plush. You can I run about 28, 29 in the front and about 31, 32 in the back on my 40C tires. That makes for a pretty plush ride. I would look for a cyclocross bike with a double front chainring. I mentioned that my cyclocross race bike has one front chainring, which kind of hinders it on mountain type riding where you really need a low gear for long climbs. So look for a double front chainring. Definitely hydraulic disc brakes, and at the minimum disc brakes. If you have to go with mechanical, I understand. But definitely get disc brakes for a cyclocross bike, and look for a cyclocross bike that has the capacity for 2 water bottle holders. Most most of them do today. My first cyclocross bike only had the capacity for one water bottle holder, so but most modern ones can carry two. And I would look for a carbon bike. I think carbon is probably one of the better overall frame materials, and I'll wrap up this video by talking about frame material, but I would look for carbon if you're looking for a cyclocross bike that also is a good gravel bike. Now, if you are getting a cyclocross bike as your do-everything bike for racing and for long gravel rides, if you can fit a second wheel set into your budget, it's really going to add to the versatility of the bike and make it easier if you want to change the tires for different types of riding, because training on your race tires may wear them down and may not be the best thing for you. Now, if comfort and stability is your number one priority and over racing cyclocross, then a gravel bike is definitely the choice with the slacker angles. It is going to be more comfortable. If you need to mount racks and fenders to your bike, then the gravel bike is most likely your choice. A lot of cyclocross bikes don't have braze-ons for racks and fenders, so if you're bike packing or commuting or just want to ride with fenders, then you're probably going to want to look for a gravel bike. Now, for doing gravel events, especially if you want to be competitive, I think it's going to come down to your goals, the type of terrain, whether or not a gravel or a cyclocross bike is the best choice. Like I said, a lot of people choose a cyclocross bike for these type of events. And a cyclocross bike, if it has adequate gear range and it can fit 40C tires, it's going to be a really good race bike for gravel events. Again, especially if you want to be competitive. And they're also typically lighter. Most cyclocross bikes are carbon or a light aluminum. So it's really going to depend on the type of terrain that you ride and race. If for gravel events, a cyclocross bike could be the choice. In more mountainous terrain where you need a really wide gear range and you've got really fast descents, then probably a gravel bike is going to be the way to go. If it's not as hilly, not quite as rough and rugged, a cyclocross bike is probably going to get you from start to finish a little bit faster. I'll wrap up this video by talking about frame material. I think the best frame material for a gravel bike in terms of comfort and durability is going to be titanium or steel. If you crash a carbon bike and you nick the carbon, then that carbon can fail. And so if you're on a really long gravel event or maybe a backpacking adventure, you may want a bike that's more durable than a carbon bike. Now, carbon can definitely be strong and built right. Carbon is very strong, but the issue comes if you ever nick it on a rock or something in a crash, then it can fail suddenly. So that's why I say titanium or steel is the better choice, I think, for a really rugged, durable gravel bike. Now, my cyclocross race bike is obviously carbon, and it's almost as comfortable as my steel bike. The advantage of steel is that you have really good comfort at a pretty good price point. So carbon can be pretty expensive because of the manual labor involved in laying up the carbon. Now, a nice thing about carbon is it's the most tunable material. If it's made right, the manufacturer can make carbon to be stiff in one direction, but a little bit more compliant in the other. And, you know, the term laterally stiff and vertically compliant, it's kind of overused sometimes, but there is some merit to it, because you can have a bike that's stiff when you sprint and crank hard on the pedals, but it can be, the rear end can be a little compliant. Again, especially with the seat post, it's a little flexible, and a lot of cyclocross bikes have that ability. So again, my cyclocross bike is a very comfortable bike. Like I said, it's almost as comfortable as steel. Now, steel is a good material, again, for a gravel bike because a lot of times you're carrying extra loads with racks and fenders. Steel is just able to do that. If you've got those braze-ons, you want those things to be able to carry a lot of weight if you're bike packing and putting a rack on the bike. So that's another advantage of steel. Steel also has a very unique feel. It's kind of hard to explain until you experience it. It feels kind of springy, and it mutes the trail chatter very well. The carbon does too. Carbon mutes trail chatter, if it's built right. And carbon can be built horribly. It can be very uncomfortable, too stiff in some ways. So it's going to depend on the manufacturer. Whereas steel, it's the tubing is what absorbs that trail chatter. Now aluminum is stiff, it's light, it's economical. So three really good aspects of frame material. The disadvantage for me in aluminum is just it's not comfortable a lot of times. Definitely not as comfortable as steel, and usually not as comfortable as carbon or titanium. But like I said, aluminum is at a really good price point, so it may be more in your budget to go with an aluminum bike. Like I said earlier, if I had to pick one frame material for a cyclocross race bike and gravel bike, it would definitely be carbon, just because of its comfort, its stiffness, its lightness. I think it's the frame material that I would go with for my one bike. If I didn't care at all about being competitive, if I didn't care about weight, steel would be my choice. Because I just love the feel of a steel bike. Again, it's something you have to experience to know what I'm talking about. But steel would be my choice if I didn't race or didn't care about the weight of the bike too much. So that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully I've dispelled some of the controversy of the differences between a gravel bike and cyclocross bike. I don't know, for some people maybe I created more controversy, but if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. If you found this video helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up for me. Thanks for watching.